Everyone keeps talking about Mexico's perfect start. 3 wins. 3 clean sheets. 9 points. But those numbers are hiding something much bigger. Because if you only look at the results, you're missing the story that could define this entire World Cup. The truth is, Mexico didn't become dangerous when they won their first match. They became dangerous long before the tournament even started. And almost nobody noticed. For years, Mexico carried one of the strangest reputations in international football. They were respected, but rarely feared. Every 4 years, the excitement would return. The stadiums would fill with green shirts. Millions would believe that maybe this would finally be the tournament where everything changed. Then came the same ending. A difficult knockout match. One costly mistake. One heartbreaking elimination. The dream always seemed to stop at the exact moment it began to feel real. After watching that story repeat itself for decades, people stopped asking whether Mexico had talent. Everyone already knew they did. The real question became something much more uncomfortable. Why did talented Mexican teams keep falling apart when the pressure became greatest? Many blamed the players. Others blamed the coaches. Some blamed bad luck. But what if all of them were looking in the wrong direction? Because football history teaches us something fascinating. The teams that change their destiny rarely do it with one superstar. They do it by changing their identity. That is exactly why this Mexico team feels so different. Not because they suddenly play beautiful football every minute. Not because every attack ends with a spectacular goal. But because they finally look like a team that understands how tournaments are actually won. Think about the greatest World Cup runs you've ever watched. Very few champions dominated every match. Very few played perfect football from beginning to end. What separated them wasn't perfection. It was control. Control of emotions. Control of difficult moments. Control of matches that seemed ready to fall apart. That is the first warning sign Mexico has quietly sent to the rest of the world. Watch what happens after they lose possession. Most teams react with panic. Players sprint in different directions. The defensive line stretches. Spaces appear everywhere. Mexico don't do that. Instead, something almost invisible happens. Within seconds, every player seems to know exactly where he belongs. Passing lanes disappear. Dangerous spaces close. The opponent still has the ball. But somehow, they already look trapped. That isn't luck. And it certainly isn't something that appears after only a few weeks together. It's the result of hundreds of small decisions repeated over and over until they become instinct. The scary part? Instinct doesn't disappear when pressure arrives. That's why this version of Mexico has looked so calm. While other teams rush attacks because of the occasion, Mexico seemed comfortable waiting. While opponents become emotional after creating one chance, Mexico stay patient. Almost cold. And tournament football rewards cold decisions far more often than emotional ones. But here's where the story becomes even more interesting. Most fans believe confidence comes from winning matches. In reality, the opposite is often true. Winning usually comes after a team discovers confidence. That confidence didn't suddenly appear during the group stage. It was already growing inside the squad long before the opening whistle of the tournament. Every successful defensive sequence, every intelligent recovery, every training session where players learn to trust each other's positioning, those moments slowly built something statistics can never fully explain. Belief. Not the kind supporters shout from the stands. The kind teammates quietly develop when they know the player beside them will make the right decision without even speaking. Once a squad reaches that point, football starts looking strangely simple. Passes arrive a fraction earlier. Runs happen at the perfect moment. Mistakes become less frequent. Everything begins to flow. That's exactly what the world has been watching. Most people just haven't realized what they're actually seeing. Because while headlines celebrate Mexico's unbeaten record, the real transformation is happening underneath those results. It's hidden inside the details. Inside the discipline. Inside the patience. And perhaps most importantly, inside the confidence to refuse playing someone else's game. Every opponent wants chaos. Fast transitions. Emotional football. Moments where one mistake changes everything. Mexico keep pulling matches away from that chaos. They slow the tempo when everyone expects urgency. They defend with numbers instead of desperation. They attack with purpose instead of hope. Those habits don't create viral highlights. They create something much more valuable. The kind of consistency that quietly carries teams deep into World Cup tournaments while everyone else is still searching for answers. And if there is one reason rivals should be paying much closer attention, it isn't because Mexico have collected 9 points. It's because this team is beginning to show one characteristic shared by almost every unexpected World Cup contender in history. They are becoming harder to understand. The more opponents prepare for them, the more unpredictable they seem to become. And that raises a question far more important than whether Mexico can keep winning. What happens when a team that has finally discovered its identity hasn't even shown its strongest version yet? Because once a team becomes difficult to understand, every opponent faces the same problem. Do you attack them early? Or do you wait and risk allowing them to control the rhythm? That uncertainty is exactly where tournament football begins to change. The greatest World Cup surprises rarely happen because one team suddenly becomes unstoppable. They happen because opponents hesitate for just a few seconds longer than usual. And hesitation is all a disciplined team needs. Mexico have reached that point. Not because they possess the most famous players in the tournament. Not because every position is filled by a global superstar. But because every player seems to understand something bigger than his individual role. Watch the movement when Mexico build an attack. The first pass is rarely spectacular. The second pass often looks simple. Nothing appears rushed. Nothing feels forced. Then, almost without warning, the entire picture changes. A defender steps into midfield. A midfielder drifts into space. A forward pulls 2 defenders away from the danger. Suddenly, the opening appears. It lasts only a moment. But that's all elite football requires. The best attacks are rarely the fastest. They're the ones that arrive exactly when the opponent stops expecting them. That patience has become one of Mexico's greatest weapons. For years, critics argued that Mexican teams played with plenty of passion but lacked the composure needed to survive the biggest moments. This team is challenging that belief. Not through speeches. Not through promises. Through decisions. Every calm pass under pressure. Every intelligent recovery after losing possession. Every moment they refuse to panic. Those are the habits that separate exciting teams from dangerous ones. And dangerous teams are often the last ones standing. Of course, there will be harder tests ahead. Knockout football has never been fair. One defensive mistake can erase weeks of brilliant preparation. One missed opportunity can become the difference between celebration and heartbreak. Every remaining opponent will study Mexico more carefully than ever before. They'll search for weaknesses. They'll try to disrupt the rhythm that has carried this team so far. The real challenge isn't proving they belong anymore. It's proving they can keep evolving once the pressure becomes even greater. Because every extra round changes the psychology of a tournament. The expectations become louder. The mistakes become more expensive. The spotlight becomes impossible to escape. This is where many promising teams begin thinking about the result instead of the process. That's when discipline disappears. That's when fear replaces confidence. Mexico cannot afford that transformation. If they continue trusting the structure that brought them here, they will remain difficult to break. If they begin chasing headlines instead of controlling matches, everything changes. History has shown both outcomes. We've seen talented squads collapse under expectation. We've also watched organized teams eliminate opponents who looked stronger on paper. The difference almost always comes down to identity. Championship contenders know exactly who they are. They don't reinvent themselves because the occasion becomes bigger. They simply execute their football with even greater conviction. That is the opportunity now standing in front of Mexico. Not just to win another match. Not just to reach another round. But to rewrite the story that has followed generations of Mexican football. For decades, conversations about Mexico have ended with the same sentence. They were close. Close to the quarterfinals. Close to making history. Close to changing the narrative. But football never remembers almost. It remembers those who finally crossed the line. Perhaps that is why this tournament feels different. Not because destiny suddenly favors Mexico. Football doesn't reward hope alone. It rewards preparation repeated so consistently that confidence becomes second nature. Every training session, every tactical adjustment, every difficult lesson learned from previous failures. Those moments rarely receive headlines, yet they often decide championships. Maybe that's the biggest misunderstanding surrounding this team. People keep searching for one magical explanation. One superstar. One tactical innovation. One defining moment. The truth is much less dramatic. Mexico have become stronger because hundreds of small improvements finally started working together. Individually, none of them guarantees success. Together, they create something far more powerful. Consistency. And consistency has a habit of surviving when emotion begins to fade. That doesn't mean Mexico are guaranteed to lift the trophy. No nation receives that promise. The World Cup has humbled too many great teams for anyone to believe victory is inevitable. But there is an important difference between dreaming and believing. Dreams depend on possibility. Belief depends on evidence. For the first time in a long time, Mexico are giving their supporters evidence. Evidence that they can remain organized under pressure. Evidence that they can defend with discipline. Evidence that they can attack with purpose instead of desperation. Most importantly, evidence that this generation refuses to carry the weight of old disappointments. They are writing their own story. Whether that story ends in heartbreak or history remains unknown. That's the beauty of the World Cup. No script can predict its ending. But every unforgettable tournament begins with one team that quietly convinces the football world to rethink everything it believed. Perhaps this is that team. Perhaps the warning signs have been there all along. And perhaps, years from now, people won't remember that Mexico started with 3 wins. They'll remember that this was the tournament where everyone noticed the results. Only a few recognized the transformation, until it was already too late.